evening, everyone. Director in residence at Lincoln Center, Bartlett Sher, and Tony Award-winning playwright, J.T. Rogers, are going to speak to us about this wonderful play, Corruption, which we just saw a teaser for. And I'm Susan Dominus from the New York Times Magazine. JT, maybe you could just start. We got a little bit of a teaser, but tell us what this play is about and also what it's about, meaning what is it trying to get at?
First of all, just thank you for the Guggenheim. It's lovely to come back and do this again. It's a real treat, so we really appreciate it. So Corruption, off of the teaser you saw, is a theatrical retelling of incidents that happened in the UK in 2010 and 2011. And if you come to see the play at Lincoln Center, you'll basically learn the story behind the story of what became the most explosive media sensation and changed the British landscape of media 10 years ago when it was revealed the depths and extent which the Rupert Murdoch newspapers were hacking into and indeed hunting down and destroying the lives of citizens for profit and for selling of newspapers. And it upended the entire structure of media in the UK. And what we are following is the story from the point of view of Tom Watson, who you just saw, and a small coterie of lawyers and other politicians and journalists who are working together to try to roll this Sisyphean boulder up the hill, as no one would either pay attention or didn't believe them and thought their claims were so outlandish they must be conspiracy theorists. And we are also seeing the story from the perpetrators of the phone hacking. And it is a play about that, and it is a play about what happens when you realize that your country is being co-opted by corporations, and what happens when the truth is no longer agreed on by both sides. So I think we have some understanding of that in this country.
You've been working on the play for quite some time now, and obviously the world has changed since you first started. When did you first start, actually?
I first read the book that it's based on and then flew to England secretly, as I was asked to do it in secret, to interview journalists, politicians, victims, spies, perpetrators, to sort of get the story behind the story. And I worked on it and struggled with it. At first I thought it was going to be a movie, and then I ended up putting away to do a number of things, including Oslo. And then when I returned to it at Bart's urging last year, it was one of those fortuitous things. Sometimes you have to put something away to come back to it to see it with fresh eyes. And I realized, oh, this is a story set then and there about us now, as I sort of talked about earlier. And it was also the revelation of that how this could be a language-driven piece and how it needed to be a play.
That's a great question for Bart. Why did you think this is theater rather than something that would lend itself better to a movie?
Well, we did do a reading of the movie script in England, which was a very fascinating experience because half of the actors in the company when we read it had their phones hacked. I know, it's weird. Coming back to it recently, as we were looking for shows, Lincoln Center and especially JT, I found the thing to make actually more sense to me as a play in the current environment of how we make shows like this than to try to lift it up into the world of movies. And I think you'll see when you hear it that language, the medium of language and of theater, is one that actually is better suited to this kind of strangely transformative, quickly moving piece than we expected. And you don't often get to see like a spy thriller / version of All the President's Men, in the theater. And that's what's made it kind of fun.
Yeah, well, I gather that there's a lot to be said about the fact that it does incorporate, I guess we're going to get a hint of this in a few minutes, but that there are so many, it's a very multimedia kind of production because it is both about media and sort of forced by the way that we communicate now to incorporate various kinds of media into it. And I'm curious to hear about the challenges that posed and also whatever was creatively liberating about that.
It was one of the great benefits of having an ongoing collaborator is you know what you know what you can each do, and you also know you can challenge each other artistically. And if anyone here, as I'm sure, have seen Bart's work over the years, you understand what he can do on the stage. So for me, even more than Oslo, it was a sense of, well, I can do anything. And really this is a vast tale. I mean, we have 14 actors, and they're all playing 4 or 5 roles when you come to see it. It's a 50 speaking part play. And it incorporates live media and taped media and actual footage and Twitter and it is, for both of us, it was let's make, as Bart keeps saying to the actors when we're acting, we're doing 21st century acting. We're doing 21st
century acting is when the actor is texting and talking to the person and probably posting on Twitter all at the same time. And so you actually, instead of the normal communication, which we're all used to, we're now doing it like on 3 levels at the same time. And the set is built with a full, ring of TVs, like a newsroom at Fox or somewhere, plus a full projection thing in the back, plus there's 94 scenes. He says there's fewer, but I don't believe him. And so you're, over the course, it switches like that. And I try to do it in such a way that you never have it change. You don't have to wait for it to go to a new scene. They all start, they overlap. One goes into the other, which is something both incredibly theatrical and somewhat cinematic, but I don't really think of it as cinematic. I think of it as purely theatrical.
Well, the thing that's interesting, working as I do now, both film and theater, is the funny thing, everyone talks about how, something is cinematic on stage, but if you're using the tools of the stage right, and again, you have a director who understands, and particularly at Lincoln Center, because they're thrust stages, for those who've seen it, that's sort of almost 3/4 in the round, you're able to move and jump cut, to use film parlance, actually faster than TV. I'm a showrunner running a show called Tokyo Vice for HBO, and I'll be on set in Japan going, man, I could do this so much faster on stage.
Super interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of counterintuitive, but it's true.
And I think audiences, and we can talk about this, can actually handle more than we give them credit for. You can assign meaning very quickly to something. You can switch it from this to this to this to this. And actually it's somewhat fun to hold all the different stories in your head at the same time, or be balancing 2 or 3 realities at the same time while you're watching it. And that's something the theater can do very satisfyingly. A thrust is extremely good for that, and that's where the Beaumont and the Mitzi Newhouse are both thrust theaters. That's a whole nother panel, but still, it's still quite fun to see how it can juggle and switch and move from one thing to the other.
So this for you was a creative, new sort of way of conceiving a play, basically.
Yeah, I was interested in mixing the medias, switching, making the scenes switch as fast as possible, juggling them, covering really fast territories, making contemporary, mixing real footage with footage we shoot, using live camera on stage at the same time as we're watching it. So it's all of that's happening at the same time within this structure of this piece. Partly because it could be my phone, but I find my own attention is changing in terms of how I take in information. And so I'm trying to find a way of exploring that in this somewhat same way in theater.
It's so interesting. I mean, is it the kind of thing that you imagine you would almost certainly have to carry forward into other contemporary works, that's just going to be the way the theater is going?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely going that way. There's a lot of different kinds of technologies coming into the theater, which allow you to play different kinds of rules along them and do bigger, broader stories. And you see them in subtle ways in plays and musicals you see now, but there's more and more change that's going into how we can see space expand and contract and change and sound and all kinds of things.
I'm curious about, JT mentioned to me at some point that there was one scene that he wrote, at least, to which you said, no, this I can't do. Do you remember what that was?
Oh, more than one. But it's not, no, to be clear, it's not, I can't do it. It's, once you write a play, and no matter how many plays you've written or how much theater you've done, it's still a shock, hopefully in a good way, when it becomes 3-dimensional in space, with actors in space, and with a director/choreographer like Bart. And so I have willfully made it, I only half-jokingly say willfully made it difficult because I want it to challenge both of us. But there are times when there'll be a scene abutting another scene, and he'll say, that's either visually uninteresting or we can't keep the pace up. How can we change that? And then he'll say, what if you switch the scene? Or what we often do, we started doing this in Oslo and we sort of pushed it further. It says, Bart will say, well, why don't we take scene A and B and just do them at the same time? And what would that look like?
I do that a lot, that's fun.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm so excited.
But also, it works when it works. And then when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So,
but the actors too have to be, and this is a great thing about working with such a good company, is once they metabolize the play, I mean, actors are the true dramaturgs of the theater because they're the ones doing it. And so even today, there were a couple of moments in rehearsal today where a number of the cast members say, what if I didn't say this because I think I said it earlier? Or I don't think, but now that you've reordered the scene, I don't think I would speak first, I think he'd speak first. And you think, usually you just go, bingo, that's great, thank you.
A lot of people would wonder about the reporting process of this project, because obviously you had a wonderful book to base it on, the play, but you yourself did some of your own reporting, and I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about, in general, what kind of things you were bringing to the script that weren't already there, and specifically about this scene that we just watched about Max Mosley.
Well, this scene in particular, I had coffee with Max Mosley, and he told me all this.
And like, how much of the language is overlapping? And
let's go. I mean, one of the things I'm interested in writing, the stories that I want to write for the stage are always private stories set against vast political historical events. And it interests me as a writer using language. It interests me because politics is just what makes me get up in the day. And I'm deeply, deeply uninterested in myself. So the furthest I can run from myself as a writer, the better, knowing, of course, you can never run from yourself, but at least you can try to get as far away as possible to expand what you're capable of writing. What you're seeing tonight, and when you see the play, if you so deign to do so, everything in the play happened. All the political events, all of the chicanery, all the twists, some of the strangest twists and turns, in fact, all of the strangest twists and turns all happened. There's large passages woven through that are verbatim from the public record, from the House of Parliament, from newspaper interviews, from transcripts of the interrogation after the fact by the Levinson Committee, as well as scenes, private scenes invented a whole cloth by me. I have a rule. I'm a playwright, so what you're seeing is always, like Oslo or Blood and Gifts or this, you are watching a scrupulously researched, accurate fiction. It's a history play with a stress on the play, because art can get to a different truth than journalism can, as we've talked about in different ways ourselves. But I have a couple rules. One is, nobody can say things on stage that are philosophically the opposite or even a lot away from what the real person I fictionalize believes, because I don't think that's fair. The other thing is, I'm not a journalist, and so when I talk to people, I never record them, and I'll write when I'm talking to them, but I'm very upfront to say, I'm not a journalist, I'm a playwright. I'm not interested in gotcha, I'm not interested in promoting a narrative that's going to be put forward like an essay, because that's not the kind of writing I do. I want you, or some version of you, to be a defendable, interesting, three-dimensional character in space. For me, the political act of the theater is to expand what we empathize with and what interests us. So, for example, for me, as a left-leaning New Yorker, the challenge that's been fun and exciting and has been very helped by our terrific cast is, how do I make the news of the international people have a rational, meaningful argument that cannot be rebutted by people like me sitting in the audience watching this play?
And every word has been double-checked by lawyers in the United States and the UK.
It can't hurt. You know, I mean, obviously there are lots of reasons why one might argue that this is an especially timely show to be being brought back to be produced right now, but maybe you could spell out for us a little bit more about what's on your mind at this moment.
You know, what I was talking about earlier when we were, before our cast read some excerpts about what the play is about, coming back, for me, there's a wonderful aphorism by William Gass, the essayist, in a sort of booklet of his called On Being Blue, in which he says, art, like light, needs distance. And so for me, coming back to this, I'm seeing it from the political and personal lens that I have now as opposed to 5 years ago. And I realized, oh, This is a story about the moment when people started to realize that all the foundations of their country and their culture were being torn down. And the paradox is the people doing the tearing down never believed that it wouldn't survive. That they too, in the tearing down, just said, well, it can all go on, it'll be fine. That no one involved, the victims or the victors, realized that they were breaking something that could not be put back together again.
I couldn't help but think about, because obviously people in the United States have not been victims of this level of a hacking scandal, but it did make me think about sort of the lack of control over the messages that were being sent in a moment of AI, and the way that that's, you know, the deep fakes of Biden as recently as just a few weeks ago. Is that something that's been on your mind as you've been putting this together?
The one rule I've learned is when people say smart things about your play you didn't think of, you say, yes, that's exactly it. No, I hadn't. I mean, that's actually, as you're saying, like, wow, that's true. I mean, what's interesting, and by the way, you were the first public to ever see this. This is like, we literally have no
Ever.
Historical event.
Check your phones.
Yes.
Yeah. What's interesting about this moment in time, about, in some ways, the same sort of colossal ominousness that we bring up when we think about AI and its ability to control and warp and make us question reality. This is the opposite of that, but was able to create the same effect. And what I mean by that was, we were talking with Gordon Brown in his office just about all this just a couple months ago, Bart and I, and Gordon said something really, he made more succinct and penetrating something I've been struggling with just intellectually. He said, you have to understand, JT, that this happened at a moment when it was actually possible for a corporation to potentially capture the British government. Because this was pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, they existed, but they had not become ubiquitous, that the broadsheets and the tabloids of the UK was still what everyone got their news from. So as you learn in the play, if 60% of the British media in 2010 was owned by one company, and they would print only what they ideologically wanted to happen, it became extraordinary. And there is as you'll, in the play, there is a struggle, as there were in real life, that Tom is trying to stop, where the News Corp is trying to, Sky TV, be Sky TV, which is sort of like pre-Netflix, their ESPN, they're basically all of what we old folk would call cable.
It's mixed with Viacom.
Yeah,
I mean,
mixed
so
with
like,
Viacom, but all of
it's
this.
the provider and the, I mean, it's all of it.
It's all of, other than the BBC, like all of, they wanted to buy the whole thing. And Gordon Brown's government said, no, we're not going to do that. So they got rid of Gordon Brown's government. And within a week of the Tory government coming in, they reversed course and said, oh yeah, we think it's in the public interest for Rupert Murdoch to buy all of this. And so the struggle, among other things, is how is Tom, and in this case, Tom and Martin, the reporter of the Indie, how are they going to get the word out to stop? Because as Tom says, profit is their North Star, their metro, the reason for being. We stop that, great man, and chop, chop, heads will fall. And that's what happened.
In a way, I think I almost wonder if figures like Elon Musk, who controls social media, are more, and have such incredible corporate power, are better, more than AI. Sort of, is that the sort of counterpart? But you said that it's exciting to bring a thriller to the stage in this way, but you are also dealing with huge, just like incredibly rich historical detail. So, what are the challenges in adapting such vast material and historical, actual, fact, and making it inherently more theatrical, such that it wants to be seen on stage? Or does it lend itself incredibly naturally?
I mean, I'm curious what you think, because we were just watching a run through of the first part for the first time today, and we were both pleased, cautiously pleased, because the story is great, and our job as storytellers is to be able to theatricalize things and root it in character and emotion and ideas. But this particular story, I mean, there's a 4-page part of the script that's sort of the bit that I talked about after the Gordon Brown gets rejected. I mean, I must have written those 4 pages 85 times. And even in rehearsal, we had to stop and redo, because just to get the information clear and interesting so the audience can be given information without being lectured to, so they can then launch into the play. The first act of most of my plays are, hopefully in a dynamic, interesting way, the teaching act. So that as you get deeper in the play, you not only understand what's happening, but you emotionally, intellectually are engaged. And one of the reasons this happened is it's so difficult. I've had British journalists proof this for me, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize X, I didn't realize Y. It's like so many terrible things that governments or corporations or individuals, often when they get away with things or almost get away with things, it's not just laziness or fecklessness on the part of the public, it's that it's very, very difficult to explain what is actually happening and why it's wrong.
I mean, you have to make assumptions that you have to teach the audience what rules they need to understand the story they're going to share, and then build the conflict, and then take it somewhere, right? So the great thing about theater, the extraordinary thing about theater that is kind of complicated, is that a bunch of people have to be in the same room who are actually not on their phone and actually watching the same event and sharing as a group the experience, as a community the experience. So what's great about theater is that it's both a wonderful emotional personal experience, and it's also like one of the few places left where you can experience what it's like to be a citizen and part of a larger group, and what it's like to be a part of. So all of those things have to be worked out in the best experiences of theater, because we don't share that many experiences in the same way. And they're getting rarer and more individualized. You're at home on your TV, you're not, so that's where it becomes difficult. Doing his plays is extremely difficult because you have to gather information, then engage in change, and then the last 15, 20 minutes is when, if everybody's on the same page and they are sharing the same story, is when the transformative, poetic, emotional, powerful events can happen. But it does take a certain time to build up the shared experience and then push into the future. And there's lots of things that go into how to make that happen.
What are some of those things?
Well, I mean,
it's we're in a textual way and in a three-dimensional and space way. I think we're both obsessed with rhythm, and I think I literally beat out. There was a moment when Tom and Siobhan were talking. They start speaking over each other. So I literally, there's a slash mark at a particular word, and if the actor doesn't come in for the overlap of that word, it goes off the rails. Everything, it's like scored music. And he will do, and that's what Bart is, if I may, is the master of. And by doing that, you literally, the way music is, you create a rhythm that pulls not only the actor through the experience, and thus the audience the experience. And so it's trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
Yeah, and it's a lot of things, and it really depends on your sort of peak experiences. It's a highly emotional, manipulative art form because you get everybody in the room. Music does this the best. Rhythm, they say rhythm is the father of all drama, so it's the kind of pulse that you set. Language has rhythm. Language has shape to it, and you learn from doing Shakespeare's, and I've luckily done many of them, that he would build these extraordinary rhythms, and they each have their own rhythm. And each one is, he's writing the play he's writing. It's a little bit the same here. This would be in the world of a Shakespeare history play, where we're going to do the great history and everyone comes together and sees some part of their history together. And then the ideal thing is not to tell them what their history is, but to share with them what the story is, so we can all feel like we have the same story. And then we get to decide, have questions about, go on to our own things, and build some sort of connective tissue over what the next step would be. This gets harder and harder in the more isolating, fragmenting world that we're in now, and that's where theater becomes more and more important, but also people's expectations of it and desires for it and what they want to do. And he often says, and I like this quote a lot, that great drama is not between a right and a wrong, but between two rights. And that's when you learn the best thing in theater is being able to hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, or be able to handle complex ambivalences, or where stressful things and it teaches you a way of sharing and experiencing history and being more compassionate, perhaps, or more connected in that way.
Maybe this will be one of our last questions, but I think it is always interesting to realize, not only is writing and directing a play a process, but it's a process that happens all, up until the minute the curtain rises and the first audiences see it. And since we are getting close, and the first performances will start February 15th, could you talk a little bit about what you're still working on, and what are you still finessing? What are you still trying to make stronger? I mean,
one is just the macro micro for me, is the larger story clear? Mm-hmm. Am I actually taking you by the hand and saying, and you come here, and you come here, and you come here, and now you decide what you think about that. But also, by doing that, you literally create, like, color-coded through the script. Let's follow James Murdoch. Let's follow Rebekah Brooks. Let's follow Tom. Let's follow this invented character. And what is their arc, and are they getting the most bang for the buck, and is it clear enough when they do this? And the other is, where does it get to? You cut not only whole scenes, we've cut whole scenes, but literally hear a speech for the fourth time, and you're like, I could take out the word the, fish, and blue. Now say it again. Oh, that's better. Huh. It's just about how do you push on and lift so that it becomes elevated.
I mean, first preview of Oslo, the very first time we did it, was about 3.5 hours long.
3:34.
I hope you all join us for our first preview, because who knows how long it will be. So we have this process in theater where we do, like, workshops, and we build up to doing it, and then you do the process we're in now, and then we build a machine, we build an operating system, and we'll get to through the rehearsal period, and then we'll go into tech, where we'll add all the technology to it. Then we do a first preview, and then we have 4 weeks of previews, during which we begin our editing process. And the editing process is where we narrow it down. So something like Oslo, which was somewhat long, finished at 2 hours and 35 minutes, and became this kind of rocket that you could kind of fire through, and you can hone it in. But you participate, if you come to previews, in the editing process itself. You actually contribute to the editing process through your reaction and through what you see, and that's another way in which people who support Lincoln Center Theater or like to go to Broadway previews are seeing how something's made, how it grows, how it develops.
In a way, going to Bart's 21st Century, doing 2 things at once, I'm watching the play and previews, but really I'm watching the audience, because I'm watching, does that work? That didn't work. Okay, I've got to go back and fix that.
Maybe one last question before we wrap up. I'm sure everybody wishes we had more time. I mean, how does this add to the oeuvre of work that the two of you have done together? How does this build on it? What kind of a culmination is it so far? I mean,
I don't like culmination, because that always means there's no more.
No.
I mean, I'll speak for me. I think that I find that Bart is interested in the political and creative things I am, but brings his own intelligence and point of view and skill set, which is different than mine. And I think it becomes a bit, again, what he was saying is, each time out, it's now becoming, well, what can we do? I feel the same way about my own work as I would feel about our collaborative work, at least from my point of view, is what can I do different so I'm not repeating, and what can I do more? Not in a Buzzley Berkeley way, but in a pushing yourself and pushing the form to see where it can go.
Yeah, I'm always exploring different ways in which the stories get told, but I think that the biggest difference is that we're different each time we get here.
Yeah.
And we're facing so many different things than we were 10 years ago when we first did Blood and Gifts, which at that time was about the Stinger missile program, which was the U.S.'s most successful counterintelligence program ever in the 80s in Afghanistan, which gave us bin Laden. It was so incredibly successful, and the ironies and complexities of that was one kind of story to tell, versus Oslo, which even since Oslo happened, we're now in a very different world about what all of that feels like and means, and so we approach this subject. I do think the technology's changed, and that's having a big impact on the stories we can tell, how we can tell the stories. Not the stories themselves, but how.
It's like having more tools in your toolbox, and saying, oh, we can do that. Because the technology is great if it's being used in the service of telling the story, right?
You often talk about Bart's gift for staging as if it were choreography itself.
Yep.
I imagine that's just a language the two of you have developed together.
Yeah, I mean, you just sort of get used to it, and you can just sort of skip over things and get to it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the choreography of the scene, if the choreography is correct and it's faceted correctly, then the language works. But it does depend, and you see, the ones that I can't get to work in the choreography, I wonder if the writing doesn't need a little help.
No, it's very true. It's very true, and he says it so gently too in the room. But
Really?
what's interesting is like he'll choreograph. I use the word choreograph because it's so fluid. It doesn't look like choreography, but it is constant moving in a way that's quite thrilling to watch. But then we'll try something, and there's multiple times where he'll go, oh, you know what, I've staged this, now the screen could be better. Sometimes we'll stage it, and we'll go, oh yeah, we should just go back and do it as written. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so you just, and what we're doing, and goes to the collaboration, since we don't have to sort of beat around the bush with each other, we just keep trying. Well, we will be restaging. I've already warned the actors in the company who haven't worked with Bart yet don't think this is set, because 2 weeks into previews, he's going to throw out the entire 20 minutes and restage the whole thing.
I mean, you have to keep in mind in a thrust what's so complex about it. And I've had this conversation with people who make films, and I was lucky enough to make the film of Oslo. A film is one point of view. But if you walk into the Vivian Beaumont Theater, you'll see there's 1,100 seats, and they wrap around the space. So it's 1,100 points of view. Absolutely every single seat is seeing something slightly different than the other one. So I'm juggling this kind of moving imagery thing. And so filmmakers come in and watch us tech or do things, their heads explode because they're not controlling the image. Now, what goes into the image in film, I don't totally always understand, but it's this kind of very profound, transformative, moving thing, which shows a bit here and a bit there and something over here, and then it comes down here, and it can be shifted by music, it can change with a visual image, there's a lot of parts to it. And I don't stop to think about how that works. I've just been doing it long enough that I go, okay, let's chuck the paint against the canvas and see what kinds of things we get.
Well, having watched these scenes and then being enticed by the kind of imaginative process you guys are bringing to the actual production, I think it's a very inviting combination. So I'm sad to say that I think our time is up, but I look forward to seeing the play that somebody writes, 15 years from now about your creative collaboration.
I mean, I wouldn't, but that's fine if you do.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Guggenheim.
Thank you all so much.
And I would be remiss if I did not say, again, the performance is open on the 15th, and I think the tickets are going fast. So I hope you'll all get to see the execution of the actual theater.